Welcome everyone to Wednesday Night at the Lab. I'm Tom Zinnan. I work here at the UW-Madison Biotechnology Center. I also work for UW Extension Cooperative Extension. And on behalf of those folks and our other co-organizers, the Wisconsin Public Television, Wisconsin Alumni Association, and the UW-Madison Science Alliance, thanks again for coming to Wednesday Night at the Lab. We do this every Wednesday night, 50 times a year. Tonight's a rather special occasion because it's the 70th anniversary of the signing of the Instrument of Surrender on the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. And I'm delighted that we're able to have a special Wednesday Night at the Lab commensurate with that special date. Tonight's speaker is Sam Soderberg. He's a student here at UW-Madison who just came back from a week in July in France, looking at the possibility of being able to identify a U.S. serviceman who was killed in action in May 27th of 1944. Sam is from Mosinee, graduated from Mosinee High School, then went into the Air Force, is now with the Wisconsin Air National Guard, and tonight he's going to give us the story of this trip to France. And this story is one person, but this person I think stands for the several thousand U.S. service members who are still missing from that war, and I hope we can do something about that here at UW-Madison and in other places around the country. Please join me in welcoming Sam Soderberg to Wednesday Night at the Lab. Thanks,
Good evening, everybody. Appreciate you guys all coming out. This is my first time being here, so I'm extremely excited to be an attendee and a presenter at the same time. So. Tonight, I'm going to be presenting on the Missing in Action Recovery and Identification Project, specifically my trip and Jed Henry's trip to France in July 2015. Tonight, my goal is the slideshow will be presenting facts to you all, and my job is to really make this story come alive as it did for me as I discovered First Lieutenant Frank Fazekas' story and went through the facts, and then when I went to France, met the interviewees, and saw where his crash happened, the story blossoms, and you can't help but be sucked into it. So that's my job tonight. So a few things I'm going to cover is myself, my background, the background of the MIA project here at UW, the government's findings on Lieutenant Fazekas' case, our findings on Lieutenant Fazekas' case, and some differences and similarities, and going forward what our plans are. So that's me in 2010. I tend to think of myself as a little guy at the time, basic training. I'm currently 23 years old. As Tom said, I'm from Mosinee, Wisconsin, small town, about 4,000 people just south of Wausau. My parents are both from Stevens Point, and I have two younger knucklehead brothers. January of my senior year of high school, I joined the Wisconsin Air National Guard and have been in that unit, the 128th Air Control Squadron, for about 5.5 years, working on radio and SATCOM equipment. In November of 2011, I deployed to Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates in support of Joint Defense of the Arabian Gulf and Operation Enduring Freedom, and came back in May of 2012 and continued my education here. As I mentioned, the Air Force training is a big part of my educational background, and then I'm also a senior in economics here at UW, scheduled to graduate in May, finally, after 6 years of school, so it took a little while. I'm a member of an organization called VETS, which our focus is helping veterans of the military transition from military life to the education life, which, as I experience, is quite the transition, so that's pretty important to us. And then I'm also the secretary of Badger Aviators, which is a club aimed at fostering relationships within the aviation community here at UW. I recently got engaged to my beautiful fiancée, Sarah, up here. We got engaged back in June, and we're planning to get married in July, so say hi to her if you get a chance. I'm hoping to fly for the Air Force as a pilot after graduation. Madison would be great, but F-16s are quite the challenge to get into, so we'll shoot for that and take whatever I can get, so that's pretty exciting. I'm hoping to stay highly involved with the MIA project going forward. It's been a life-changing organization for me, and I want to give as much back to that as I can, and eventually attend grad school. So my involvement with the MIA project started last fall when Chuck Kaczynski and Dr. Josh Hyman came to an MIA meeting, or excuse me, a VETS meeting, and they presented the case for their program, and specifically Private First Class James Gordon, which I'm not sure if all of you know of him, but he was kind of the first soldier brought back by an outside of the DoD entity. And Chuck and the rest of the Biotech Center had a big part in that, as well as Jed Henry, who accompanied me to France. So they presented their case, and they were asking for undergraduate researchers like myself, specifically veterans who would have a strong stock in helping them. So it was really a natural thing for me to say that I wanted to join. I've always wanted to give back to the veterans that came before me. I think it's incredibly important to do so. So I expressed interest in joining the team, met with a bunch of people involved in the spring, and volunteered for the trip to Europe in July of 2015. So my motivation, it's kind of interesting, the motivation behind the project, because I'm not ashamed to say that when I watched the documentary on Private First Class Gordon, I cried 4 to 5 times. I'm a sucker for this kind of stuff, and that feeling is something that you can't forget, and chasing that, I think, is part of all of our motivations in the MIA project. So although I made some sacrifices when I deployed, these men and women, especially the ones that have not been recovered, gave the ultimate sacrifice. And on that note, the family sacrifice is just as important to remember. So for example, when I left, when I got deployed, I remember the look on Sarah's face and my mother's face specifically, and then I also got to see the look on their face when I came home. But these men and women never saw that look. So that's kind of my personal motivation in my head, something to shoot for as I'm doing the dirty work and hiking through the mountains and whatever it might be. So it's something that is very powerful to the behind the scenes motivation. So the MIA project here at UW, many of you have probably heard about it. Our current focus is on the recovery and identification of World War II veterans, specifically in the European theater. It's an interesting thing here at UW that we have the ability that many other organizations don't, and that we have everything that it takes to recover and bring back missing in action soldiers. Specifically the 4 scholarly disciplines of history, archaeology, forensics, and genetic analysis. Here is a picture of Private First Class Gordon, right on the screen for you. He was the first assisted recovery, as I mentioned. And there are 73,000 more missing in action U.S. service members from World War II. So this is exactly 70 years since the conflict ended, and we still have 73,000 men and women overseas. So there's plenty of work to be done, that's for sure. So this presentation is going to concentrate entirely on First Lieutenant Frank A. Fazekas. I like to think of Frank as a personal role model to me. I included his height and weight on there because he's pretty much exactly me. I thought that was kind of unique. Frank's from Trenton, New Jersey. He was married at a young age. He died when he was about 22, and he was married to Teresa, and they had a young son, Frank S. Fazekas. I included the amount of flying hours he has on here because I'm 23 and I have 7 hours of flight time. He was 20 and had 540 hours of flight time. So this guy was the cream of the crop and really knew what he was doing. And the fact that he had 540 flying hours at age 20 is incredible. But anyways, he was a P-47 pilot, which as you can see there on the screen, the P-47, for the 22nd Fighter Squadron with the 36th Fighter Group. And a bit of recent news, as in last night at about 9 to 10 p.m., I was doing some research online, and we believe that we found Frank's son and his nephew they're still out and about on Facebook. And we reached out to them and are waiting to hear back from them. So it's pretty exciting to see it all come alive in terms of their family. So the crash account from the official side, the government's, so the IDPF is the individual deceased personnel file, and the MACR is the missing aircrew report. So every deceased person in a war in World War II got an IDPF. Every air loss got a MACR. So the MACR is specific to the Air Force. So Frank crashed on May 27th, 1944 near Bouchour, France. Excuse my lack of pronunciation with that town name. He was returning from a mission and he was hit by anti-aircraft fire. He quickly lost altitude, went into a spin, according to the official reports, and crashed with the bomb load exploding on impact. So the bomb load exploding on impact is very critical to our job because of details that I will get into in a little bit. The interesting thing from his co-pilot is that Lieutenant Fazekas made no radio call or attempt to exit the plane. So that would kind of hint at the fact that he was either killed while he was in the air or knocked unconscious. So that kind of later on I'll introduce you to our witness, and that kind of contradicts the only eyewitness account on file's report. So that's something that we'll touch on later. A witness on the ground claimed the explosion sent debris flying in a fire that lasted for several days. So that fire is also key in the fact that it may have cremated his remains, but there is a chance that it did not. So those are two important things that we need to focus on. So some details in the IDPF and MACR. You're going to be hearing the name a lot, Mr. Kusch. So there's actually two Mr. Kusches. I like to refer to them as the wartime Mr. Kusch and our Mr. Kusch. So the wartime Mr. Kusch is our Mr. Kusch's father. He was the mayor in the town throughout World War II. And within the IDPF, there is a letter written by Mr. Hilaire Kusch, the mayor and the father of our witness, that the plane was hit over the town of Wotton. 2 bombs exploded on impact, and he states that the remains must have been scattered into small pieces throughout the surrounding field. It's a bit interesting that a small section of Frank's thumb was reported to have been recovered, but it gets a little wishy-washy in the reports on what exactly happened with that, and nobody seems to know now. So a summary of the government's reports. Lieutenant Fazekas, according to those reports, was killed or knocked unconscious. That's a key fact. Multiple bombs exploded on impact. Like I mentioned, that's very important to our recovery efforts because that adds the variable of location to where his remains might be. The only remain, like I said, was the thumb that was recovered, and another key piece is that the entire plane is still at the crash. So we don't have to worry about the variable of multiple different sections of the plane being other places, and therefore the remains might be in other places. So the official ruling by the government in terms of Frank's ability to be recovered was he was declared non-recoverable on July 17, 1947, so 3 years later. The main factors in that were the evidence and the eyewitness statements of the explosion of the bombs, either cremating or separating his body into small pieces, the scattered debris, the multiple day fire, and the no remains found. So basically, what was going on at the time was there were a lot of other things happening post-war and an incredibly large task in recovering the 73,000 plus missing in action soldiers. So any case that got kind of difficult, they tended to declare him, the soldier, as missing in action. So you can understand it, but then looking back 70 years later, it's kind of like, well, I want my son or daughter or dad or mom to come home kind of thing. So it's a bit of a tough situation that they were in. But anyways, he was declared non-recoverable. Mr. Kusch, the mayor, had a very strong position in the reports. And he did not directly witness the crash. He was at the town hall at the time and heard it because it's within probably 2 miles of the crash site. So he got his information from his son, Mr. Mark Kusch, who, as you'll find out, is quite the character. So there may have been a little bit of misinformation happening in the 12-year-old to father discussion. So like I said, the massive task of recovering all those soldiers was quite daunting and required a lot of resources, and with the onset of the Korean War shortly after, a lot of things had to happen quickly and sometimes didn't. And like I said, the ordnance explosions and fire gave reason not to pursue it, and the Korean War had a big influence on things being pushed to the side. So now on to the MIA project site reconnaissance. So this is where the part in the story where it really came alive for me. It went from being the official government report and names on the sheet to a person, a father, a husband, everything that I could relate to in my life, as well as a military member. So Frank's name really started to jump off the page at me. So Jed Henry and I, who was kind of the main catalyst in the Private First Class Gordon case that I mentioned earlier, in bringing him back, he is one of the main players in the MIA project here. I volunteered to go to France with Jed to scout a couple different potential recovery sites from July 1st to the 15th. And we traversed a path that was quite physically demanding, as you can see, with the mountains in between France and Andorra in Spain. And people often ask me, once I got back from the trip, why I went. Because it was voluntary. I financed everything on my own. It was not something that I needed to do by any means, but the way I describe it was this study abroad experience of a lifetime. It was something that, once it was brought to my attention, that I couldn't pass up on, because I knew that the story could come alive if I did the right things. So it was quite an easy decision to make the financial commitment and jump on board. So we concentrated our scouting efforts on 3 air loss sites, the P-47 site of Frank, and then 2 other bomber sites that aren't discussed in detail in this report. And all of these sites were located in France, primarily Normandy. So the efforts that we wanted to exhibit when we went over there, where we wanted a detailed drafted map, we wanted pictures of the site, we wanted eyewitness interviews, Mr. Kusch, we wanted to do metal detection to find the exact location of the plane, and we wanted to use GPS locating. And the reason why we had all of those detailed efforts is we wanted to create a report detailed enough that if Jed and I were not there in the future, Chuck or Professor Aylward or whoever went back going forward to do the actual recovery wouldn't need us to point it out. So we wanted to be as meticulous and detailed as possible. So our goal was to collect specific data on the location, layout, and logistics, and the main part was to determine the viability of recovery. Is this a good option for us to pursue as the first outside of DoD entity to independently recover a missing in action soldier? It's a large question to answer, and it was something that we needed to uncover every stone in order to figure out. So, Mr. Kusch, my personal favorite part in the story. According to the reports in the eyewitness, we narrowed it down to the location in the field north of the town, which is the Kusch family field. So Mr. Hilaire Kusch's son, the mayor at the time, is still alive. His name is Mr. Mark Kusch. He's 83 years old. I really want you to picture this. You're 12 years old. You're in the backyard of your house that you've lived in for your entire life. You've had a war going on for the past, at that time, 5 years. And you're playing with your whatever the toys were at the time, and you hear an explosion off to your right. And he witnessed the crash firsthand from his backyard. So he's the only verified eyewitness of the entire crash. So he passes information to his father. And I don't know about you guys, but when I was 12, there's no way that my dad was listening to me telling him some serious incident that happened that may, for example, some ruckus on the playground in middle school. My dad's a principal, and I always had to report to him when I was in middle school. So he didn't listen to me too much, I can tell you. So we kind of have the suspicion that Mr. Mark and Mr. Hilaire had a little bit of difference in opinion on the events. So the reason that we are concentrating on Lieutenant Fazekas' site is because it's a single-seat fighter crash. That removes the variable of the remains not knowing specifically who they are. You can figure that out if you know the plane, and that's usually done by using the ID tags on the machine guns that are from the fighters. And this, we know it was Lieutenant Fazekas' plane. The other thing is the pilot is definitively in the plane upon the crash. If this co-pilot didn't see him jump, then we know he's there. And this site had the best viability of recovery to date for us. The biggest thing is the Kusch family are incredibly charming. They remind me of any small town family from Wisconsin. They are so passionate and so willing to help including donating the equipment from their construction company. And I'm sure Mrs. Kush will provide more cookies and coffee for anybody than they can handle, as she did for us when we were there. And because of their willingness to donate equipment, it's the most financially realistic option for us for our first recovery. So the Kush family meetup, we pull into the small town that they live in. It reminded me a lot of my hometown, just a couple coffee shops, a few pubs, and more pubs than churches, as is common in Wisconsin. And we get to their house, and the second I walked in, it felt like walking into my grandparents' house in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. Mr. Kush, Mrs. Kush, they were both there. We were with the mayor. It was an incredibly welcoming atmosphere. And as soon as I met Mr. Kush, even though I didn't understand a lick of a word that he was saying, because I don't speak any French, he speaks no English, so it was hand signals, and we had a translator there with us to help. I could just see that little twinkle in his eye that he was ready to mess with his grandson kind of thing and play a couple pranks. Yes, sir?
I'm sorry, you mentioned the co-pilot a couple times. Did he survive?
He did survive this incident. I am not sure if he survived the war.
You mean wingman or co-pilot?
Excuse me, I've been saying co-pilot. I meant wingman. My mistake. So what's that?
What does that mean?
So they're two separate P-47s. So it was a single-seater fighter rather than a co-pilot being behind him. He was by himself in the plane, and there was another plane with his wingman who saw the incident. My mistake. Thank you for pointing that out. So a few stories I wanted to tell that Mr. Kush said to kind of bring alive his story from World War II is, this one was incredibly emotional. He was telling a story. He was out tending to his horses with his family and his father, and a squad of German soldiers pulled up and had them at gunpoint, telling them that they needed to relinquish their horses to them for the war effort, even though they are French citizens. And Mr. Kush was like, absolutely not. And he was around 10 at this time, so he was sticking up to a bunch of big Germans with guns in his face. And the ultimatum that they gave him was that he could keep all the rest of the horses, but only if they shot his personal horse, because they figured out who his personal horse was. And when he said that, the tears came from him, and it was pretty sad. But on a lighter note, my favorite story from the entire trip was Mr. Kush sneaking a German rifle from the sentry post. So he's 12 years old with his buddies, causing trouble. There's a German sentry down the road guarding a main intersection of the road. He and his buddies go out at night, probably I think he said 10:30 at night, and they go walking up to this German sentry. And Mr. Kush is walking with a limp. He's perfectly fine. He just decided to walk with a limp for a specific reason. And they walk past the German sentry because they had seen them a couple times, and the Germans were like, oh, that poor French boy must have gotten hurt on the farm or something. And Mr. Kush is telling this story with the biggest smile on his face, just loving it. And he said he walked by the German sentry, went to the camp where the other sentries were sleeping that were off duty, kind of looked around, made sure nobody was watching, and snuck into their stuff and stole one of their rifles. So the reason that he was limping was on the way back, he stuck the barrel of the rifle into his pants, the butt of the rifle up around his shoulder, and he's 12, so the rifle is about as tall as he is. And he goes walking back past the sentries, doing that limp again, and the Germans are like, oh, there's that boy, we should get him some help or something. So we're sitting at the table, and his eyes just light up, and he's like, oh, I have something to show you guys, to me and Jed. And we're like, all right, well, let's see it. And he goes, through the translator now, he goes, I have a German bomb to show you. And me and Jed are like, this could get a little interesting. So we don't know if it's live or if it's a bomb or what it is. So he says he's going into his bedroom, walks into his bedroom, grabs this long sack, and I'm like, that's a weird looking bomb. I've never seen one that looks like that. And he reaches in and he pulls out the rifle. And we were like, okay, we're going to make it home so far, unless the plane crashes. So that just kind of speaks to Mr. Kush and his personality and the spirit that he had as being a troublemaker. And like it says on the slide, I didn't understand a word he said the entire time, but he really wanted to get to know us. And there's Mr. Kush and I. You can kind of see his little devilish smile that he has. He's quite the guy. And for being 83 years old, it's remarkable how he moves around great. He was doing little dances and getting all excited with the coffee that his wife was giving us. It was pretty entertaining. This is Mr. Kusch, Jed Henry, and myself. Jed is the guy that accompanied me on the trip, who I mentioned earlier. So Mr. Kusch's account. So we're sitting at the table after all the funny business gets over with the rifle. We ask him, what he saw. So, like I mentioned, he was 12 years old. He was playing in the backyard of his family home. He saw Frank's plane get hit to the west of him. He was at about 10,000 feet, and he watched Frank come down. And as Frank was coming down, he saw him drop the external gas tank that all P-47s had. So the interesting fact about the P-47s is their motor was so big and they used so much gas, they often didn't have enough gas to hold in the wing tank. So they had an external gas tank that sat underneath the fuselage. So even on normal missions, they would come back, drop the gas tank so that they could land normally, or else it would hit the ground potentially and cause an explosion. So he saw Lieutenant Fazekas drop that gas tank, which to me is a conscious decision. I mean, that's a switch that you have to pull in order to drop the tank. So Mr. Kusch thought that he was going to attempt a belly landing in the field where he ended up crashing, but as he was coming down, he didn't see the power lines that were in front of him, eventually noticed them, pulled up quickly, and didn't have enough power from his engine, which was damaged, to escape, so he quickly went up, came into a stall, and nosedived right straight down into the field. So some consistencies there with the official report, but a little different in the fact that he wasn't in a flat spin and he dropped the external gas tank. So he believes strongly that the pilot was alive when he crashed. He either thinks that he dropped the gas tank in order to belly land, or Frank thought he could make it back to base and was trying to lose weight in order to work with his damaged engine. So the biggest point in Mr. Kusch's account is that he is adamant that no bombs exploded on impact. We asked him multiple times, and he was absolutely certain that no bombs went off. And he not only saw, but he also heard the crash right in front of him. It's not more than probably 50 meters away. So that was a big contradiction and useful information for our recovery efforts as compared to the official accounts. The only thing he said he heard was ammunition from the machine guns cooking off. So he stated that oftentimes, if it was German wreckage that got a plane that got shot down, the Germans would come and recover whatever they could from the site. But if it was an American loss, as long as the crew members were no longer living, they didn't care about it and would often just leave it alone. So he stated that no major parts of the plane or remains were taken besides that small section of foam that disappeared. So the Germans did cordon off the site for a couple of days immediately after, but because he was the mayor's son, the eyewitness, and it was on his family's property, he got to go see and physically look into the crash site crater a couple of days after. He stated that the plane, you could tell that that's definitely where it was. The engine was still relatively intact, the main block of it was. And just to wrap up his story, I was very taken aback by the passion that Mr. Kusch has. His desire for the recovery to happen is very, very evident. He's really bothered by the fact that I'm here presenting, not specifically me here, but that I'm here presenting about recovering this crash site 70 years later. That really bothers him. And I think Chuck and Jed and I and the rest of the MIA project really want to make this happen before Mr. Kusch passes away, which could be 15 years from now, it could be very soon, we don't know. But that's one of our main goals. And his love for Americans and his wife's love for us was very strong, and that was very much so appreciated by us, even though we were there relatively on business. So that was very touching to Jed and I. So here we have the modern day site layout. This mouse isn't going to work for me here. Oh, there it is. So if you guys follow my cursor here, right here is the Kusch family home. So Mr. Mark Kusch, the son, the eyewitness, was right here. This is their family construction business. A high-speed rail line is running northwest to southeast here. And this is the field in question, and specifically right here is where the crash was believed to have happened. So this picture is the modern layout, the map layout in the background with a aerial photo from 1949 taken and laid over the top. So if you look closely, here's the house. The business was not there in 49. But if you look closely, this access road right here was not there in 1949. But it runs kind of parallel to this section line in the field. And if you look closely, you see this little discoloration here. And that's where we believe, and it coincides with Mr. Kusch's account, that the crash site is. The little circle down here, that's just watermarks from the processing of the photo. But it's interesting to note that discoloration in the field. The description of the site specifically, it's located in a small hayfield like I showed on the map. It's directly adjacent, not 50 to 70 meters from the Kusch family residence. It's easily accessible on foot and even more so by equipment and cars, which is very important to our recovery efforts. There's an approximately 8-foot wide gravel path that leads just south of the site, which is even more convenient for us in terms of equipment. You don't have to trudge through mud or ruin any of their other crops that they might have planted. The soil is used for agriculture, so there's not a lot of big boulders in it. It can be easily excavated and moved around. And the field is about 110 by 85 meters. So it's not the biggest field in the world, but it's a nice landmark for us to start our excavations. So a couple of pictures. This is from the entrance to the dirt access road. So we are looking northeast currently. And over here you can see Jed took these photos. I'm standing right there, and then Mr. Kusch and the mayor and his son are out there directly in front of the crash site. And then this barn over here is the site of the next picture. So this is from the barn, and directly behind us from the viewpoint is the Kusch family home and business. And there we are again out surveying the site. This is looking southeast. This is the draft of the site that I drew up. We used a lot of range finding equipment. We used GPS locating, and then pieced it all together basically. And if I'm being honest, I drew this in the passenger seat of a car on a French highway, which was quite the experience because the motorcyclists get pretty active out there. So here it is in paper form with the family residence over here, the SAS Kusch business, the barn, and then the Macker 9835 crash site where we believe Lieutenant Frank Fazekas is located. So this is a direct view of the crash site. Obviously you can't see a whole lot as things stand now. The one thing that we did notice when we were there is there's a small dip in the soil, which isn't the most conclusive form of evidence, but it's interesting to note that where Mr. Kusch thinks the crash happened, where the discoloration on the map is, and where we notice a small dip in the level of the soil all coincide to relatively the same position. So that's a good sign for us. Quick picture of the soil here. This is just on the edge of the field. That's my leg standing there. You can kind of see that it's not full of boulders, and it's been actively farmed. It was actually filled in 2 months after the crash because in the wartime they needed to continue using the field for food. So once they realized that the Americans weren't coming for an extended period of time to recover, and nor were the Germans, they made the call to bring in some dirt, filled back in the field, and continue growing crops there. So the soil is important for Professor William Arroward. He's the archaeologist on our team, and he was interested in getting a picture of that so he knows what he's getting himself into in terms of an actual excavation. And he's worked throughout the Mediterranean on centuries-old, millennium-old sites, so this shouldn't be a problem for us in terms of an excavation. So now to cover the differences in the reports and the agreements in the reports. The in-flight reports, what the plane actually did and what happened to it, tend to be in agreement. Both the wingman and Mr. Kush's report say that Lieutenant Frank was hit by anti-aircraft fire at about 10,000 feet. He came down, was trying to avoid the power lines. The flat spin and the not flat spin are different between the two accounts. Went into a stall that he tried to pull up and crashed nose first into the field. Post-crash, there's agreements that no plane parts were taken, no significant remains were recovered, and that the fire burned for a couple of days, which are all pretty important things to note. Now for the conflicts in the separate reports. The biggest question that we have, both for the recovery and our safety, is was there an ordnance explosion on impact? The official reports claim that they did occur. Mr. Mark Kush, the son, is adamant that they did not. So that's pretty critical to the recovery of our remains. It can create a variety of problems because we may need to hire a professional bomb disposal team. The interesting thing to think about is that if Lieutenant Fazekas was returning from a mission, a bombing mission, that it would make sense that he didn't have the bomb still on the plane, at least in my opinion. Something that's less important necessarily to our recovery, but extremely important to the family, if I was the family, is was Frank alive on impact? Was he still fighting for his life, or was he taken out in the air? He did not attempt radio calls, and he did not attempt to jump, which point at him not being alive. But he did drop that external gas tank that I mentioned, which is a conscious decision. You have to choose to do that. It doesn't just happen. So that's kind of something that is important to the family if I were them. So my opinion of the whole story, I think that Frank knew that he was in trouble, and he either wanted to make it back to the base, or he wanted to attempt a belly landing and hope to escape before the Germans got there, or at least survive and hope to survive in a POW camp throughout the war. So I think the reason he didn't make a radio call is because he was concentrating on flying the plane. He had a long way to go to get home, and it's not easy to land a plane with no power. As I've quickly learned in my pilot training, sometimes your instructor will drop the power on you, and you need to quickly scan and find a field or some sort of place where you can get yourself out of trouble. So I think when Frank was hit, he immediately recognized that he needed to follow his training, saw the field, and thought, that's where I'm going for if I need to crash. If not, it's directly in my flight path to home. So I think that he was descending and was coming down to the power lines, saw them at the last second, pulled up, stalled because he didn't have as much power as he thought, and once he realized that he wasn't going to make it when he hit that stall, he didn't have time to jump or to call for help or radio to his wingman. And then the other thing that I mentioned, why there might be some conflicts, is when it passed from Mark to his father, like I said, when you're 12 years old, you don't get a whole lot of credit for your account of the story. So there definitely was a chance for there to be some, the telephone game kind of thing happen where information is misrepresented or misunderstood. And then also once the mayor, Mr. Kush, passed his son's story to the Germans, you're running into some language barriers there as well. So there's plenty of room for information to be misconstrued. So the logistics of our recovery. So the Kush family's willingness to help is huge. It saves us a lot of money financially in rental of equipment. The soil is easily accessible. We can get down to the level which is said to be around 10 meters of the plane. The area is free of obstructions. It's easily accessed. There's a high-speed rail line. There's multiple highways and roads running by. We can easily get there. The equipment can be quickly deployed down that dirt access road. So there's a strong chance that this can happen. The single-seat fighter plane recovery, like I mentioned, there's no discrepancy of who each person is, the remains. We scouted another site while we were in France of a bomber that split in half. The tail went one direction and the fuselage went the other. So you have tail gunners and waist gunners and people that could have been in the middle, and it's much more difficult to figure out who is who when you find a human remain in the soil. So the fighter pilot aspect of it is helps us greatly in determining who it is. When we get there and we start digging, I would imagine that we will locate the engine first, and because as a single-engine fighter pilot, you have the engine right in front of you. If we find the engine, which is the biggest hunk of metal there is with metal detection, go down and carefully scan the earth around it, we're going to have a good shot at finding some remains of Frank, if they haven't been cremated or if the bombs didn't go off. The other big thing that I mentioned is the plane did not disintegrate in midair, so we know where it is, or we know the general location of it. We don't have to look in a mile-wide radius or something like that. A few obstacles that we need to address and are currently addressing is the field directly south of the indicated wreckage is not owned by the Cush family. So when we asked if that would be a problem, there's a slight bit of hesitation, but generally in small French towns, the mayor runs the show. So we had the mayor with us, and he was pretty confident that the owner of that field to the south would be willing to cooperate with us. So that was good to hear. The contradictions in the reports lead to questions of the live ordnance. Like I said, Mr. Cush claims there's no bombs. The official reports say they are, so we may need to hire an explosive ordnance disposal team, something of that sort, or just be incredibly careful in our excavation. A few other obstacles. The Cush family reports oil, aviation fuel, and other chemical smells are present while throughout the past 70 years when they've been actively farming. He mentioned they were having a barbecue once and the smell kind of overpowered the chicken, which I thought was kind of funny. So that's both an obstacle and something that is kind of evidence that the plane is where we think it is. But if there are going to be toxins there, so we have to be careful with that while we're excavating. And the other big thing is this is the first time someone outside of the DoD has attempted an independent recovery. So we're kind of on the leading edge, which is pretty cool coming from Wisconsin and the university kind of being the spearhead on this, because there's a lot of room for improvement in bringing missing and active soldiers, but there's also some room to get kickback from the Department of Defense, which isn't the end of the world, but it's something that we need to be aware of. So our future recovery plans, we want to do this and we want to do it quickly. So October 2015, this coming October, is our target date. We're planning to send over a squad of 6 UW faculty members and students in order to do the excavation. We're actively raising funds to cover our airfare, lodging, recovery equipment needs, whatever other expenses come up. And we estimate it to be around $20,000. And the last line on here was shocking to me when I first found out. If you take the amount of soldiers, if you take the budget of the DoD for recovery of missing and accident soldiers divided by the number of soldiers that are actually brought back per year, which is around 100, they average $2.5 million per recovery, and we can do it for around $20,000, maybe a hair more, and much quicker. So there's some definite room for efficiency improvement, and we're confident that with the group of people that we have here that we can do that quickly. Chuck and Jed and some of the other members have been in discussions with the Department of Defense. They don't have a mechanism that can directly contract us as a non-government organization to work for them in terms of where the funding flows. But we are working on it, and there's some hope there that we may be able to figure something out going forward in terms of working together rather than as separate entities. So that's all I have for you today. I want to thank all of you so much for coming. I hope my goal was achieved when I presented the facts on the slideshow and then told the story and wanted it to come alive for you. Mr. Cush is an incredible man, and learning about his story and all of the funny things that he did at the risk of being shot was quite the experience. And learning about Frank as a role model for me is hoping to become a pilot and bringing him home to his son and his nephew that we just found and are hoping to be in contact with shortly is something that is very powerful in terms of motivation. So thank you all, and I will take any questions that you might have.